Okay. Hi, everyone. The panel you're tuning into is Reducing the Offshore Advantage. Thank you for joining, and I look forward to what I hope will be an enlightening, thought-provoking discussion. I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Mark Balestrom. I'm an attorney based in St. Louis, Missouri, and I am U.S. counsel for the Vancouver-based law firm Segev LLP. Just tell you a little bit about my perspective before we start. I've been entrenched in the iGaming industry for, over 20 years, since the mid-90s. And I've really had a front row seat to the evolution of the regulated industry in the US over the years. So naturally, as it has evolved, so has this discussion we're having now. And the organizers have put together a panel that I think is well-rounded and should be able to tackle this topic from very unique perspectives. So I'm glad to have everybody on board, and I'll start by introducing the panelists. Stephen A. Miller is co-chair White Collar Defense and Investigations at Cozen O'Connor. In that capacity, he negotiated for Laura Varela of the Five Dimes brand an unprecedented settlement with federal prosecutors that permitted them to apply for licensure in the U.S. He also served for 9 years as a federal prosecutor, both in New York City and Philadelphia. We have Bill Krakenberger, who is one of the best-known sports bettors around the world. He's based in Las Vegas, has been there for the last decade. He came out there from New Jersey, where he originally hails. Moved out to Las Vegas to make a living as a professional sports bettor. And he's unique among professional sports bettor in that he's readily available to discuss his trade. And he's made many media appearances over the years, and he's here with us to discuss it in this panel. And then our third panelist is Matthew Heap. You go by Matt, correct? Yes, I thought.
Correct.
I want to make sure that. Matt Heap is chief of sports betting for Colorado Department of Revenue. And that's been instrumental in getting Colorado's sports betting industry off the ground there, or the regulatory regime off the ground there. And among many tasks, he's focused on not only creating a regulatory environment for consumers that is ideal, but also he's had a focus, among other things, he's focused on assuring that the industry there is equipped to succeed with all of the outside competition. So they've done some things there that are maybe a little different than we've seen in other jurisdictions, and he'll talk about that. We may have a fourth panelist, I hope we do, and that would be Jimmy Vaccaro, who is the sports marketing director in South Point Hotel and Casino. He's been an odds maker since the late 70s, where he started at Barbary Coast and has been with a number of different casinos since then, and has most recently landed with South Point. So hopefully he'll join the discussion, and I'll be able to work him in there. I'll be directing questions directly to the three of you, but I'll welcome comments from whoever has comments, and I'll do my best to keep everything fluent and coherent given the medium that we have here. And of course, we'll keep an eye out for questions from everybody who's tuning in, and perhaps be able to address some of those as well. So I'll change gears here. I was initially going to have Jimmy address it from the industry side first, but Matthew, I'd like to bring in the perspective of a regulator. You guys jumped in to the sports betting, regulated sports betting space. You guys being Colorado. You're one of the more recent states, which means you've had the advantage of learning from the experience of others. And I was wondering if we could just start with you to address what you've done there to address the regulatory challenges related to offshore competition.
Absolutely, and appreciate being included on the panel here. So it should be an interesting discussion. As you mentioned, we had the luxury of having some hindsight from some of the other regulatory enforcement areas that we have at the Department of Revenue, which I'll get into later. But we also had the advantage of picking the brains of some of the other states, operators, industry members, when we were tasked with setting up our regulatory structure. And what really has worked best for us, and it goes towards this reduction of the offshore advantage and in the illicit market, is that our overall regulatory setup and framework really was built on the principle of collaboration with all aspects of, like I said, industry, regulators, citizens, leagues, conferences, and colleges, things of that nature. And when we set out to start doing our promulgation of our rules and had meetings, and luckily it was right before all the COVID stuff set in, and we were able to bring a lot of those folks back to Colorado for a week-long session of stakeholder meetings that were real instrumental in what we believe created reasonable, non-bureaucratic, common sense regulations that not only the industry could live with, but they had a huge part in helping to create. And, in a nutshell, that is something that we believe set up the framework for successful startup for a lot of the businesses, even in light of all the COVID and pandemic obstacles that we've had to overcome. But what it did was it also added the ability for businesses to come in, get licensed quickly, and get their framework set up so that they could become operational on May 1st if they so chose to do. And we had a handful of operators that did just that. And one of the things that we think really was helpful is the ease of entry into the sports betting arena for the operators as well as the players, with online setup and no need to show up in person, which obviously wasn't even something that we could do once casinos were shut down. But it allowed for everybody to get their foot in the door if they were up and running. And I believe that that's kind of a hallmark of one of the things that will not only for Colorado, but across the country, be a way that competition really helps to reduce the offshore advantage because of all of the unlimited options that it offers players wanting to get in here in the States, not having to seek illicit or offshore opportunities.
All right, I'll quickly change gears here because I want to bring Bill into the conversation. Bill, you and I spoke a couple hours ago, and even though you live in Las Vegas, you are currently in Atlantic City, and that turns out to be very relevant to today's discussion. So if you can jump in by just talking about why you're in New Jersey right now.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me again. I'm in New Jersey because New Jersey, in my opinion, is the best place in the country to bet sports because of all the different sports books here. We have in upwards of 15 to 20 sports books, depending on, for me, the ones that allow me to play. Some don't allow me to play because simply I win, so they throw you out or limit you to such a small bet that it's not worth even having any money in. But currently, I'm playing at DraftKings, FanDuel, PointsBet, a plethora of others. I mean, I'm just playing in all these books. They take my bets. Whereas, hard to believe that a Vegas resident, where I am, I only have 4 sports books to play in. And imagine that, 4 sports books I have in Las Vegas. So whenever I hear, the media or people say, "Oh, Las Vegas, it must be great. You can bet sports there." They don't realize what it is for a professional sports bettor to be able to bet sports there. I'm not allowed to play at the William Hills of the world, the station casinos, the Coast casinos now, which has brought in an outside Euro company in to book their bets instead of booking it in-house. These places either completely ban me because of winning, or they limit you to such a little tiny amount that it's not even worth playing. A place like Treasure Island, they don't want anyone with a pulse. They want the average Joe, the public gamblers, which, let's face it, I think the average bet in the United States is $66, I was reading recently. That's who they're going after. And I fully understand it, by the way. I'm not so upset that I have to come to New Jersey to bet. Let me tell you, I really like betting in New Jersey. I'm from here originally, so I have friends and family here. I just don't like coming back in the winter all the time. But I'll tell you one thing. It's so worth it financially for me to be in New Jersey almost every single weekend. Like, I'm going back to Las Vegas tonight, but I'm flying back out not this weekend, the following weekend. And I'm probably going to stay for 2 or 3 weeks. And especially Super Bowl time, playoff time. There's so many more proposition wagers to bet here and different ways to bet on games than there is in Las Vegas. I don't mean to down Las Vegas or anything, but it's the old school mentality there. It's the old school ways. Until there's Euro competition in Nevada, until we have the FanDuels, the DraftKings booking bets in Nevada, it's probably going to stay that way. What I mean by that is let's just use any Sunday's game. A Sunday game, a Sunday night football. I'm using a primetime game. Sunday or Monday night football. Let's use Monday night. Let's use that last night. So last night in Nevada, if you were at any given sports book, you have about 10 to 15 props to bet at each sports book. Some only have 5 or 6. Some have 10. Some have 15. There's probably not a sports book in this town, in this state, that doesn't have 100 proposition bets or 200 proposition bets or ways to bet a game. And for someone like me that needs a lot of volume down, I work on small margins and small percentages. I need a place like New Jersey and maybe even Colorado. Now, I have heard Colorado's a little bit tougher now on limits and stuff. A couple guys said it's unlike New Jersey and the East Coast where we're very aggressive. It's almost a rite of passage. It's in our blood to be sports bettors here. So you have a lot of square money in the market. Don't forget, you're getting that sports betting people coming in from all over North Jersey, even New York, because it's not illegal. It's not. I'm sorry. It's legal in New York, but only in the 4 upstate New York casinos. They do not have app betting. App betting would change the game for New York City. Like, just imagine if you had app betting in New York, all the sports bars and stuff that would actually have parties on Sundays and Saturdays and based on all the sports books being open, probably having sponsored bars by the sports books. So I know I kind of go all over the place when I'm talking. I get excited about it. This is my industry. You got to remember, 10, 15 years ago, I come from very old-fashioned parents, old-fashioned Hungarian Jewish father, old-fashioned mother, Italian. They were like, oh my God, gambling's no good. You have to be careful. So I was in the closet, gambling, not telling anybody and thinking it was like taboo years ago. And now it's so out there and regulated, and it's an exciting time for me. So I come back to Jersey to bet sports because I have more places to bet and better opportunities for me. So I'm here. Try to be here 2 or 3 weekends a month, really.
So I'll bring Matt back into the conversation here. First, I would say there's a question that was asked that I just wanted to address that briefly. That it's a very good question, and it kind of relates to something I'm going to move on to shortly. So I've got that in the queue. Bill brings up 2 things. Well, among other things, 2 things that struck me as being advantageous in New Jersey. One of them was the limits, and then the other was the betting, just the availability of propositions in different bets. And Matt, you and I talked about this a little bit briefly last week, and I know that you made a lot of efforts in Colorado to see to it that there's as much different options available to bettors. So I was wondering if you could kind of address how you've addressed that. But in addition to that, what your position is on the betting limits as well.
So in Colorado, there is no legal betting limit on sports betting. And, we leave that to the casinos to manage their liability on what they're willing to take on different bets and events. So from that perspective, that has brought a new, we believe, new customer to Colorado that comes to the state and wants to engage in that. And we leave that, like we do a lot of things, self-regulation, self-policing, to the industry itself, and going to use a risk-based approach. But in regards to what Bill was saying, we're very proud of not only how quickly we respond to requests from operators to add new bets, new type of bets, new events, new leagues, et cetera. We have an ongoing calendar that basically is managed on a daily basis, with pretty immediate response when an operator requests to put new content on there, new offerings. The in-game play, the vast amount of different types of bets that you can make in Colorado, we feel is, if other states have it, that's fantastic. But one of the things that we set out to do when we did our research and homework prior to starting and picked, like I said, the brains of a lot of different smart people, one of the things that we heard that was a little bit of a problem in some of the other jurisdictions is, we can't get our content, or we can't get our events and our bets approved quick enough to get them out there for the players to want to participate. And so we made a conscientious effort to really put a lot of manpower into addressing that. And I think that goes to Bill's comment of, if he's talking about in Vegas, you don't have as many options. I think the advent of the internet operators in Colorado, which there are currently 16, one more getting ready to go live, for a state that the size of our population, that is a lot of operators out there. That is a lot of choice for customers, consumers, for bettors. And it gives them a lot of different options, gives them, different sign-up promotions and odds boosts and things of that nature that really has drawn a lot of people into the market, and presumably from other places where they were betting either illicitly or offshore, however you want to capture it. But our catalog and, again, the vast amount of approved events and the quick turnaround that an operator can reach out to us and have that conversation with us, and we get that turned around rapidly, alluring to businesses that want to come to Colorado. Bill had made mention of European countries coming to the States and wanting to set up a presence here. We have PointsBet chose to make Denver its home base for the United States for their North American operations. And we see that as a coup not only to Colorado and the framework that we've set up, that businesses like that want to come here and set up shop. It's a hub in the middle of the country where businesses can come in and do that and tap into a market that's obviously growing leaps and bounds if there's any kind of an election. So, I would agree with him on the fact that, the more states that legalize and the more sensible regulations that accompany that legalization, the more competition that comes into the states that is only benefiting everybody.
Okay, and I would definitely want to bring Stephen into the conversation in just a moment. I did want to address a couple of questions really quick from the audience that were a little more pertinent to what you're doing there. And one of them is how will the legislators cater to a more sophisticated, low margin, high frequency exchange type model?
Well, in Colorado, I think right now the legislation doesn't really address the limits per se. We have chosen to engage with the operators of allowing for them to, basically monitor their liabilities. The one thing that we do have from a consumer protection standpoint in Colorado is the reserves or the bond requirement that they have to have in order to cover any outstanding debt or bets. So, as of right now, I don't know if there's any additional legislation that's on the horizon to address this, but the betting limits is not something that is statutorily mandated at this time. It's pretty much up to the operator on what they feel comfortable with taking or offering.
Does Colorado allow operators to offer bets on both sides, to offer both sides of a bet, like in Las Vegas? And I'm assuming that question is more along the lines of
the layoff wagering.
That would be, yeah, I believe so.
I mean, there isn't something that was talked about at our stakeholder.
Okay. I have lost. I don't know if it's me or, yeah, it looks like we lost Matt. I thought it might have been me that we lost, but I I guess it was Matt. I hope everybody's still with us. Let me actually hopefully get back to that, but let me move on to a different topic. And Stephen, I'd like for you to address this. You guys are your client Five Dimes is an offshore book that was cleared to apply for U.S. licensure. Can you speak to the feasibility of achieving legitimacy in the U.S. from the perspective of an online operator? And what I mean by that is, when we first saw the regulations rolling out in the U.S., very strong sentiment that they were going to block the so-called bad actors. Now we're seeing some more possibilities, some more inroads for offshore operators. And I guess the question more specifically would be, okay, there are inroads, but how feasible is it to do that? Is it something that a lot of operators are going to be able to do, or was Five Dimes a unique situation?
I think a lot of operators are going to be able to do it. They may not be able to do it as cleanly or as well as Five Dimes is going to be able to do it, hopefully, because that's a pretty unique situation. As most of you know, that was operated by Sean Creighton. His widow took over, but the website basically operated on autopilot until she could come to an agreement with federal prosecutors in Philadelphia in this agreement she signed, and now she's in the process of trying to get licensed. So I think it's a pathway. I mean, it's really, it's a question for Matt and the other regulators. The topic here is reducing the offshore advantage. So for every dollar, competition is great, but for every dollar in the domestic market, you're getting $7 going offshore. And so as a regulator, how are you going to approach that problem and try to bring in some of that revenue and collect the tax money? You could either do nothing and continue to let it go. You can take a whack-a-mole approach, like we've heard, and maybe bar anybody that's had any connection to an offshore market. They're just out, in which case there's really little incentive for them to go legit. So you're just going to take an enforcement strategy. What I'm trying to offer here is a third way, which is at least partially successful so far, where an offshore operator comes in from the cold, says, we're willing to give up the U.S. market and go legit, and we'll take care of our criminal liability like they did with the Department of Justice. And now we're going to be in the process of talking to regulators to show you that, while you may not license every single person that was associated with Five Dimes, there are at least some people who could be licensed. For instance, in our case, Laura, who did not have a connection to the business before she was thrust into ownership of it. And there are certain compliance steps that can be taken to assure a regulator of your good faith. And so when you have a case like this, I'll sort of kick it over to Matt, obviously not in an official way, but just as a panelist. When you have an operator that is willing to go through these steps, the question comes to the regulators, are you willing to take someone under these conditions? Because if not, I think what you'll see is the offshore market will never go this way again.
And I think we might have lost Matt again.
Well, I clearly scared him off. I mean, that was what happened.
So,
I can jump into here.
I definitely would like. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I'm very familiar with Five Dimes, very very familiar with Sean. Well, of course he did die, but I am very familiar with him. He went by the name Tony, and I used to know him back when he was in West Virginia in the '90s. So I absolutely knew them. Not my favorite. Wasn't really one of my favorite books though, because he was a sharp sports bettor himself. So if you have a sharp sports bettor running a sports book, they know that you don't want someone like Bill Krakenberger playing, or you'll limit me to something. So it was kind of cat and mouse, of course, with me and Sean. Of course, I didn't play with him for the last 20 years, but I find it fascinating, so fascinating that places like Five Dimes are now. They're not taking U.S. bets no more. They left the market along with a couple other companies. But I find it fascinating. These companies are now breaking into the legal world of sports betting in the U.S. And you know what? Why not? You have Party Poker, Poker Stars, these companies that were all illegal, the Full Tilt Pokers, these companies were all illegal in the United States, dealing poker games in the U.S. They legitimized themselves. They paid the fines, and they kind of got on the right side of the counter here. So I find it fascinating that there is actually regulatory committees and stuff actually willing to listen to their side, take their side, and license them. Listen, there's a lot of tax dollars and a lot of other things like that to be made here. So really, you want to bring these other companies on here and make them legitimate. And Five Dimes is one of them. So good. Congratulations to them.
And Matt, I'm not sure which elements that you were able to pick up on, but the general question was related to so-called bad actors, allowing them to come in to clean up and get a license. And does Colorado, is there any experience dealing with such parties in Colorado? And regardless of whether there is experience, what's the position there? Are you open to that?
Well,
I believe
I would say, I can't speak for the commission in space.
Looks like we're having a bit of a lag.
Darn it. I wanted to know that answer too. Darn it.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, we got you. Trust me, me too. I want to hear it.
Are you able to hear me yet?
I think so. It might be a little delayed.
Yep. Okay. At any rate, the commissions and boards are going to have an interesting dilemma with this because, as I was starting to allude to, coming from the regulated marijuana space, which is where I came from prior to gaming, we had this same dilemma with folks that had operated either illegally in a context that now their activity became legal. And I think as long as businesses want to try and come into the legal space and they have to acquiesce to the fact that they will have to follow stringent rules and regulations and possibly change business structures and do other things like that, I think that commissions are going to be presented with businesses that come in like Five Dimes that very well might make a good argument for why they belong in the industry. And assuming that there's guardrails and boundaries put up that they're willing to adhere to, knowing that there's extreme consequences for violating them, I do foresee that you will see some offshore operators want to come to this industry just by the sheer magnitude of customers that are now here that are not necessarily going to have to go offshore in order to engage in sports betting. So I think that's something that our commission in Colorado very well could see in the next few years. You certainly can't turn a blind eye to the fact that the revenue that's coming in, that businesses wouldn't want to come into this space. So I think that's probably something that's on the horizon, and commissions are going to have to take a serious look at that and not just completely push them aside because of some of the things that necessarily happened in the past. I think one thing that's important, though, is the immediacy in which these businesses want to come into the legal space. Once it's an option, they need to come in immediately and try and get into the legal framework. They can't continue to wait years to try and get in.
I think that's right, Matt. And I think that, that amount of time is going to decrease as, if there's an example, whether it's Five Dimes or someone else, someone's going to be the first to do this. And if offshore operators can follow the lead of the companies that went before them, then the commissions will also get better at establishing, like, here are the 7 things you need to do. And here are the things we're going to be checking to make sure you're doing that. And, from a commission's perspective, I would imagine there probably is some reluctance to just, after years of operating in the illegal market, just immediately 3 months later, letting the whole operation come into the regulated market. Maybe that's not enough. Maybe they need to see a record of success and compliance, which is understandable. But maybe there's a middle step, like being able to license the brand name to one of the established casinos, which is almost going to be sort of like mentoring them into the regulated market. Something like that. There are middle grounds. I don't think we have to look at it as black and white that, do you let a sports book that operated on the wrong side of things immediately enter the regulated market? I think we have to consider there's that middle ground. But as the regulators, for you and for New Jersey and some of the others, I think that this is a great opportunity in this moment now to tell the offshore market, here's what you need to do if you want to go legit. And if you prescribe that, those instructions, I think you'll see a lot of companies follow.
That's an interesting perspective, and I think it's a very realistic view of the way things will likely go forward. Did you find? I know that in my experiences, speaking with regulators, the biggest, if not the biggest, one of the biggest issues when you're dealing with these offshore books is the actual the personnel involved, and they're wanting to bring certain individuals or to take certain individuals out of the equation. Does that hurt from a competition standpoint? In other words, you take away that expertise. Lots of times that expertise is what differentiates what made the book so successful. I guess one question for each of you. First of all, Stephen, did your client find it difficult to be able to preserve that without to be able to get licensed and be able to fire on all cylinders?
Yeah, well, Laura's still talking to commissions now, so she hasn't even gotten licensed anywhere yet. So, but that's definitely an issue. It has to be, and the commissions should make it an issue that you don't just wholesale import everyone who was involved in the old way of doing things. But there has to be a middle ground where there's certain key personnel are allowed to come, or the commissions just tell the person that is licensed or the brand, the company that's licensed, you got to go. There's a lot of good people in this industry. You got to get somebody that we've already licensed, and they can then operate under your control. Somebody we trust.
And Matt, are you guys, for example, equipped to regulate and oversee something like that to make sure that whatever conditions are set upon, a so-called bad actor coming in, that those can be enforced? Is that a burden on the regulatory regime?
I think burden may be too strong of a word, but I do definitely think that is something, again, with some guardrails and the right personnel in there, and the people and the businesses that would have to be responsible for the actions of some of these employees. That's absolutely something that is within our charge of what we're supposed to do. Of course, the easy answer for a commission would just be to say no. But again, does that really promote competition? Does that promote growth in the industry and the expertise coming onto the right side of the line where it's in the light and people can actually see what's going on and there's some consumer protections around it? I think that Stephen hit on the right thing. There's got to be a balance in the middle somewhere where there's acquiescing by both sides to truly take a look at it, but also to remove the ones that really are probably a liability for some of the things that they may have done criminally in the past. That doesn't mean that you can't come up with a new construct that doesn't really benefit the consumers and the growth of the industry as well.
Okay. Bill, I'll switch back to you. One of the things that that you had brought out was that New Jersey has a distinct advantage over other jurisdictions, Nevada, for example, because of what's available to you, both in terms of the limits as well as the availability of bets. What about the advantage that the offshore operators have. In other words, New Jersey can compete with Nevada, but can New Jersey still adequately compete with offshore operators? And are there any advantages that existing gray market operators provide, or black market really provide, that New Jersey can't keep up with?
Well, it's a fantastic question. And first, let me go back to Matt and in Colorado. He's absolutely right about even PointsBet moved from Jersey City, New Jersey, out to Denver for their home headquarters. That shows me so much. So when I say over Nevada jurisdiction, Colorado is right here with New Jersey. So I am really happy. I'm going to be there one of these. I'm going to be there real soon, too. They have a couple opportunities they don't have here. So I'm going to be there. But going back to your question, I have to tell you, I'm much more comfortable posting up my money with the FanDuels and the DraftKings of the world than I am posting up with a sportsbook offshore. I don't even play offshore for many reasons. One, I live in Nevada, and I really probably don't have to do that because now there are some little advantages, maybe like a place like a Pinnacle Sports, which has 105 juice. What that means is you're laying 105 on an NFL game instead of laying $1.10 when you're going to bet a game. But I think that could be overcome by these sports books that are represented in Colorado and New Jersey with the boost and the promotions. They're unbelievable. Sign-up bonuses. Every day they're sending you a different boost in the mail. So that can be, and I say email and text message, that could be overcome, the offshore bonuses and stuff that they give, or the reduced juice that they give by these regulated sports books. And let me tell you something, too. People like to touch and feel their money. I'm very experienced with the human tendency in this field. People like to touch their money that day when the game's over or the week's up. They like to go to FanDuel in the Meadowlands or resorts over here and go to DraftKings and withdraw their money from the counter. They don't like to have to wait for payment processors and different things you have to wait for offshore. And maybe you have to go through committees and roll your money over, whatever it may be with the offshore world. People like they like to be able to get paid, go home, drive home. This is a big weekend town. They drive home and come back in town, play again, put money in their app, be able to have it accessible to them within 24 hours. Big difference from the offshore world, which after payment processors and fees may take weeks or weeks.
And another question directly for Matt: do regulators in other states that don't have gambling, I'm assuming that you communicate with a lot of regulators in other states. Do they understand like the importance of having more than one operator or multiple operators for the sake of revenue and generating more with competition?
I don't know that we've been presented that exact question, but we do have frequent contact from other states that are on the cusp of either legalizing or going live, trying to figure out what works. And the conversation does come up, for instance, in Colorado, like I said before, if it didn't cut out, there's 17 online operators in our state alone, and competition and all of the other good things that come along with that really is great for the player, but also the other businesses. So, if that is something that we were to be asked, we would most likely prescribe to the fact that, more is better for everybody involved. And it drives a healthy market, which is what we've seen every month since May up until just this past month, because it couldn't continue to double. But the revenue was doubling every single month, even during a time when we didn't have much to bet on except Korean baseball and table tennis. So, I think that has a lot to do with the variety of options for the players. They could go to, 5 different operators. And now they can go up to physical retail books that give them a variety of options in our 3 different gambling towns. So that's certainly something that appears to be working well.
And Bill, how's your success rate with table tennis?
That was some stuff that was being played on, but I have to play on stuff I have some information on. I had nothing on table tennis and on these crazy sports that they were playing. He's absolutely right, though. Matt is right. There was a lot of action. Even in New Jersey, I was hearing from the guys that I know in the books. It was ridiculous amount of action. People had nothing to do. They have to bet on something. But now they can bet on everything. Right now it's prime time. Football, basketball, I mean, there's just so many things happening right now. It's a real exciting time, and just it's an exciting time in our lives for sports betting in general. And I'm glad it's being regulated, and they have gentlemen like Matt that are really looking into this. And then you have the other side of this with Stephen with 5 dimes, which I find fascinating. So this is a very interesting time. I can't wait to see what the next year brings.
Great. I think that's a great closing point too, because it looks like we have run to our limit on time. But with that, I'd like to thank all 3 of you for helping to make this a very informative panel. I hope the audience found it informative as well. I know there were some questions that I didn't get to, and I apologize for that. Some of them I think Jimmy would have been very well equipped to answer. So maybe we can follow up on those or something. But in any event, have a great rest of your day, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah.